Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started with our presentation today. Before I leave my initial slide here, however, I want to point out that you have joined the webinar in auto mute mode, meaning that you cannot communicate with me directly during the presentation. However, if you notice on the diagram, you do have a raise hand icon on your toolbar, so that at the end of the session, when time for questions and answers, if you do have a question, you can raise your hand, which will enable me to unmute you so that we can hear your question. I do want to point out to you as well that I am recording today's session. There's been some changes since the last time we published a recorded version, so I'm going to be refreshing the recorded version on the webinar on the Resource Center with today's. That said, this is the Denali Upgrade webinar, part 2 of electronic medical records. Our Denali Upgrade webinars are being presented in 5 separate sessions. 2 of those for electronic medical records for the clinical piece, 2 for the financial piece on the billing side, and then a 5th session for portals and mobile applications. Today's session is concentrating solely on orders management. Now, orders management is an enhancement to the existing order sheet if you are already using that in your practice in part for lab and radiology perhaps. Order sheet has been enhanced in that it now fully encompasses not only lab and radiology, but also consults, referrals, and procedures, whether they're done in-house or referred out of your clinic. Accessing the order sheet is at an encounter level, and this is in 2 ways. One, you have an encounter table of content menu called Order Sheet, where you can simply open the order sheet in its entirety directly from the main menu with no diagnosis in reference. And then you're able to assign diagnoses as needed for each applicable test, which we're going to cover here in our presentation. The second option is at a direct diagnosis level on your assessment screen. So if you decide to go to the assessment and choose an ICD code, you have an order sheet button. Then the orders will be directly tied to that selected diagnosis by default. Now, if you choose not to use the option of the order sheet button for the selected diagnosis, there is a property here at the bottom that you see where you can hide that button so that it doesn't even show on the screen. Then you will have to use the menu option Order Sheet, as we see here at number 1. Either way, the functionality is going to be the same to you. Now, before we get into the workflow, we just want to look at the screen itself. The order sheet in the Denali version is being presented in an accordion fashion. And when you initially launch it, it is going to open an expanded view, meaning your encounter table of content menu will be concealed. And so in the upper left, as you see here by the number 1 on my PowerPoint slide, there will be an icon that allows you to return to standard view, which will redisplay that table of content menu. So it will open in full screen to give you the added screen real estate for processing your orders. The screen itself is multi-tabular and accordion in format as far as being able to collapse and expand and move through the different order types. And we're going to take a look at that as far as the functionality and workflow is concerned. By default, you have access to previous orders or results at an individual test level. So that will automatically be there so you don't have to go searching for the last time that test was done or what the result was. And then the action buttons accommodate both single and multi-person workflows, which we will cover in today's session. So that is the initial overview of what the order sheet looks like. In comparison, for those of you who may already be using it partially in the existing version, it opens with the table of content menu still visible. So the screen real estate is reduced. And you see the look and feel is just different, and some of the functionality is not present now that is in the new version. Most importantly, results tracking, which is now embedded into the new user interface, currently is external to the order sheet. So we're going to dissect that user interface now from top to bottom. There's 4 primary components in the order sheet screen. First of all, you have the orders ribbon. Now this spans the entire screen width across the top of the order. It represents, as you are building your orders, there will be different color-coded tabs for each order of each order type. Beneath the ribbon then, you'll notice that there is some tabs. We have a select tab, and we have a selected list orders that goes along with it. That would be our 2A and our 2B here on our slide. That is your default view. So what you're looking at on this slide is the default view of a blank order sheet when you first launch it. It opens in data entry mode, assuming you want to select tests. And as you select them, they're going to get added over to the right-hand side so that you can manage them and then ultimately create the order. Now there's also an order tab. The order tab will become enabled once you've actually created the order. So first you select the test to compile the order, then you process the order. Each piece of that is a separate tab within this window. And then the fourth primary component is your action buttons, which is what you actually use to compile the order. So we're going to look at all four of those components in the workflow. First of all, the first component is your orders ribbon. And initially, of course, when you have a new encounter, it will be empty. So as you see here at number 1, the ribbon will stretch across the entire screen and there will be no tabs present. But you'll notice at the left-hand margin and the right-hand margin of the ribbon, there is a navigation arrow, because depending on how many orders get added to that encounter, you will be able to scroll through all of them. Now, the second bullet point here shows a populated orders ribbon. Once orders start being associated to an encounter, and you'll see there's different layers of color coding, there's different symbols and icons and labels on these tabs. So there's a lot of information that you can get at a glance by looking at your orders ribbon. For instance, the tab color will indicate the status. A light purple means it's to be ordered. You haven't completed it yet. That means that it can still be modified as far as changing the vendor or the diagnoses or the test or whatever. Dark purple means it has actually been ordered, so it can no longer be modified, but it is now pending results. Orange means that it is the one currently selected, the one that you're actually working on. And just as a side point, you'll see once you get into the workflow, when you click a light purple tab, it momentarily flashes orange because you're working on it. And then it will become dark purple when you complete it. Now, within these tabs, regardless of the color, there is an icon to indicate the order type. L for lab, R for radiology, C for consult or referral, and P for procedure. And then once it's actually been generated and the requisition is produced, whether it was printed, faxed, or sent electronically, there will be a check mark in front of that icon to indicate that order has gone out of the clinic. The title of the tab will indicate the vendor, if it is a lab or radiology test, or if it is a consultation or a procedure, it will indicate the test that is being requested. Now that's while the order is pending. Once the order is generated and it becomes dark purple, that label becomes an order number. So while it's light purple and you're working on it, there's no order number generated yet, it's modifiable. But then once the order number is assigned, it is no longer modifiable. All you can do is produce it or delete it at that point, which again, we're going to see that in our workflow. There's also a status indicator when it is still pending. An N, for instance, means you're scheduling it for now. You're going to do it on today's visit. Or there may be a number with a letter indicator indicating a future. 1 week, 1 day, 2 weeks, whatever the scenario is, because you're able to schedule both on today's visit and or in the future the same test or different tests. Now in the case of a pending order, you will have the ability of removing it. So on the light purple tab only, you notice that there's an X in the far right side of the tab. That means if you've decided that this is wrong, you can just remove it and you don't have to finish processing it. Of course, once the order is completed again, you won't have that option. And then, as I mentioned earlier, there's navigation arrows on either end of the ribbon to let you scroll through all of them. So obviously, based on however many number of tests you're ordering on an encounter, will determine the number of tabs present within this orders ribbon. Now below the ribbon, we have our multi-tabular hierarchy. Now this is just kind of an FYI quick glance architecturally of the tabular structure. When we get into the workflow, then you'll see how these tabs play into each other. But initially, you have a select tab, and within that select tab, you have order type tabs below. So the top layer there, as we're covering on this particular slide, is select or order. When you're in the select mode, you're building your order. You're choosing your test. So therefore, you choose the order type. So you have that next tier in the hierarchy where you choose lab, radiology, consult, or procedure. Now, once you've selected your test and you're generating the order, when we go to the order tab, you don't have order type anymore because the order is specific. So it's already determined whether it's a lab or an X-ray or a procedure. However, if you notice in my second and third screenshots here, the order tab has its own secondary hierarchy based on whether or not it's a consultation or a procedure. In that middle example, it's a consult. So there's two more tabs. There's a consult tab and a response tab in conjunction with the order once it's generated. Same with procedure. Once the order is generated, you have the procedure tab. You also have a checklist tab, which is a new feature we're going to cover in our workflow, where you can have pre-procedure checklists. And then you have an attachment tab if you start getting responses in. So the hierarchy, again, is going to be based upon what you're doing. Are you choosing tests and compiling the order, or have you already produced the order? And then the second tier of that hierarchy is either going to be the order type when you're choosing, or the order depth, the default template to generate the order, whether it's a requisition or a referral letter, or the response, the results that are coming in. On the far right margin, then, you also have a tabular hierarchy at a categorical level. So if you want to look at only your labs or only your radiologies and so on, and you have more than one test within that category, then it can be collapsed and expanded accordingly. And that's where you're actually going to manage these tests that you're creating the order. So this would be something that you manipulate prior to generating the order. So you've got your orders ribbon, then you've got all these different tabs beneath the ribbon. Now going further within this tabular hierarchy, on the select tab, it's divided in two sections. If you recall up above on our initial overview of the skin, I had a 2A and a 2B. Well, this is 2A, the left-hand margin of the order sheet in default view, which is where you choose your tests. So underneath your select tab, as you notice by the number 1 on my slide, you have order type tabs. And then each order type is going to have different behavior, or the data populated will vary. For instance, in my screenshot here, we're looking at the lab tab. So the tests displayed by default are laboratory testing. Obviously, if you go to radiology, you're going to see your radiological tests and so on. So the contents, even though the screen itself will look the same, the contents will vary. And then what you can do within those contents will be based upon the order type you're on as well. As far as the parameters that are available, if you notice the second bullet point here, if there's preferred tests, they will default. If there is no preferred test, it will default to all. You have a choice of looking at a patient's health maintenance tests or order sets that you created. You can filter your tests. So this screen will be pre-populated incidentally. So every test for that order type will automatically be displayed when you choose that order type tab. So you don't have to then do a pop-up and go into a search screen. So there's a lot of time and steps that have been consolidated here. When you load the order sheet, it's going to automatically be populated for you. And then number 4, you see if that test has previously been ordered and or resulted, you will have a hyperlink so that you can look at that last order if it's not resulted yet, or look at that last result if it's come in. So you don't have to go search for it or go to the document list and try to find if the result has come in yet or not. Now the right-hand side, or 2B, is each of those order types, whether it's expanded or collapsed. This is where you manage those tests before you create the order, meaning verify it's the right x-ray. Did you want one view? Did you want two views? Did you want an MRI or a CAT scan? Did you want blood or urine, and so on? So at this point, as you see here, what's expanded, you got the little triangles, either pointing up or down based on whether it's expanded to collapse or collapsed to expand. When tests exist, there will be a little folder icon with a check mark so that you know that category is populated. So in my screenshot here, you notice next to the number 2, I have the little check mark icon for radiology because I have x-rays. But if you look above at lab or down below at consult and procedure, that little folder icon is missing. That means those tabs are empty. There are no tests for those categories present. Now for lab and radiology, on the right-hand side, you'll notice my number 3 and my number 4. You have the ability of entering comments, and you have the opportunity of scheduling. And with the schedule, you'll notice you can do both now as well as in the future. So if you want to do in my example, we're doing a nasal bone x-ray right now on today's visit, but then we also want to schedule it again for a week from now. While you're in this mode, if you notice number 1, next to the test name displaying in orange with a little X beside it, that still gives you the opportunity of removing it. So at this point, like I said, if you decided instead of chest x-ray, you wanted chest 2 view, you can click that little X to remove it and then bring in the 2 view test. Because at this point, you're only building your order. Once you've built the order, if you notice here on my number 1 bullet point, the X goes away, and instead the order number will display in parentheses to indicate the order number for that test. Now you have 2 options for diagnosis assignment, and we're going to look at both of these in our workflow. You have an ICD hyperlink or an assign ICD button. Both of those open an ICD mapping pop-up, which allows you to sequence and assign diagnoses as needed. When you're on the procedures, there's an indicator whether it's an in-house procedure or an external procedure by the directionality of the arrow inside the icon. The performing consult provider will be there for your consultations and your procedures, so you can decide who you're sending this person out to outside of your practice. You've got the status indicator, which will show either in green or red. Red would be only if you've deleted it. Now this is when the test was ordered and you're deleting it. Up above, you're removing it, so you're never even ordering it. It won't be reflected with a red status of deleted. But if you actually go so far as to generating the order and then realizing it was wrong, at that point your only option is to delete it. So then the status would show as deleted in red. Otherwise, you're going to see the normal statuses you're used to seeing now on all of your order screens, meaning approved, ordered, or results received. Now, the order tab, we're not going to cover right at this moment because it changes based on workflow. So if you were to click the tab right now, before you've generated any orders, you get this error at the bottom telling you that there's no orders to display. That order tab is only populated once an order has been compiled. You compile it up here on the Select tab. So we will see this order tab populated a little bit later in the presentation when we're looking at our workflows. And then that brings us to our 4th component, which are the action buttons. The reset button simply undoes any unsaved data entry. From the moment you loaded the screen, anything you've been doing that you haven't saved, if you decide you want to undo it, you hit reset. And it restores it to what it was like when you loaded it initially. Save and create order are your workflow options. And for the sake of discussion in my webinar, I'm using the analogy of single-person workflow or multi-person workflow. That may or may not be the case in your practice. It may or may not be a rule that you follow religiously, because it may vary based on your patient's scenario, and that'll make a little more sense when I get into the workflow. But there are different behaviors behind each of these action buttons. So in other words, if you click the Save button, this is what we loosely are talking about in a multi-person workflow. Maybe within your practice, the doctor doesn't have time to worry about the patient has Aetna in-network PPO, so they can only go to Quest, or they're Medicare, so they can go anywhere they want. You know, he doesn't need to worry about that. He lets his MA or his front office staff worry about that when they check the patient out and complete the order. So all the doctor worries about is, I need a CBC, I need a metabolic panel. He clicks that on his order sheet, goes to the next patient. So he would click Save, and then that indicates to that second person coming in behind the doctor what tests now need to be completed. So clicking Save leaves the order pending. That's when it creates the light purple tab on your orders ribbon, and it does not have an order number, because that clerk then or that MA can come in behind the doctor and make changes as needed or create the order. That said, if the physician does like to do everything on his own, or that's just your workflow in the practice and you don't want all these additional steps of another person coming in behind you because it seems like unnecessary steps, then you can simply say Create Order. Create Order will bypass the whole pending step. You'll never see the light purple. It'll immediately generate an order number and go to dark purple. When you do that, however, there can be no changes made. So you have to know that this vendor is the correct one for this patient, for this insurance, for this procedure, for this consultation, whatever. So that really is based on your workflow as to which option you're going to choose. But as far as the action executed on the order sheet, if you click Save, it simply puts it into a pending order status so that somebody else can complete it. Does not assign an order number. Can be modified if you realize something was wrong. If you notice number 2D, my bullet point here in the middle of the slide, there is a process status message. The bottom of my slide gives you the property name. If you want to use it for this multi-person workflow, that will update this visit status on your home page. So instead of saying with doctor or ready for discharge or whatever, it could say process L, process R, process C, so that whoever's looking at that home page will know I need to go into that room and complete that order that the doctor's requested. So that's an option to use in conjunction with that workflow. But none of that is relevant if you click Create Order, because you simply choose your test, create order, print the requisition. So it's a big time saver choosing that option, but it all depends again on your workflow. So before we get into specific workflow at an order type level, the first overview here is assigning the diagnosis to the orders on your order sheet. And this does call into play your workflow as well, because some doctors will do their assessment at the very end of the encounter, after they've already made their plan of care, they've decided what they want to order, then they go in and put their diagnosis and stuff and complete the chart. If that's the case, then you're not going to have your diagnoses available yet on the order sheet. So we're giving you the ability of assigning diagnoses to the test in that example. However, if you do the assessment first, then do your orders, there's properties that you can set that will decide which diagnoses auto-assign to those tests. So you will start off when you open this order sheet either with diagnoses pre-populated based on property that you define at your local preference, or with no diagnoses. And then you have different options that we're going to look at here of assigning the diagnoses. So there's a lot of choice here when it comes to diagnosis behavior and the order sheet. The top example here, if you notice my number 1, when my order sheet was loaded, I already have a bunch of diagnoses displayed. Some of them are blue, some of them are olive green in color. The color denotes whether or not that diagnosis exists on this encounter's assessment screen yet. And again, this will be based upon property. You notice at the bottom, there is a property that you may choose to use in your practice or not, where past medical history diagnoses automatically populate your assessment when the patient is marked arrived. So if that property is set to yes in your practice, and that patient had diagnoses in medical history, when they got marked arrived, they were automatically populated to the assessment. They will also show up here in the blue color underneath the number 1. You've also got olive green ones there. Those are ones that are in the patient's past medical history, but not on the assessment, because maybe you don't have this property set to yes. You don't want diagnoses pre-populating for medical history. So they're there on the face sheet under past medical history, but they're not on the assessment. Then those also could be pre-populated here on your order sheet, and that would be in the olive green. So your scenarios could be no diagnoses at all, only blue, only green, or both, as you see here. Whichever one of those choices applies in your world, you have the Add ICD button, which, if you notice here next to my number 2, will invoke your general diagnosis search or your patient's past ICD search. So you can always add to. So whether anything defaulted or not, you can still choose out of the diagnosis search and populate more diagnoses at will. Now, in the case of those diagnoses being pre-populated, unless you by now have learned what all of these 70,000 plus ICD-10 codes are, you can hover your mouse over and you'll get a tooltip that will give you the full description. Now, I mentioned you have properties or preferences which control what populates here, the blue, the green, or both. This is a new property with the Denali version. You see it there, that top bullet point. It's called Order Assign ICD Rule. Now, this is a system-wide rule, so it's not doctor-specific. If you're a multi-doctor, multi-specialty practice, you will have to collectively decide which rule you like here. But this is strictly with regards to pre-populating the order sheet. So it's not as critical. I'm not trying to play devil's advocate or scare you here. It's not that critical that it's applicable to everybody because as we just saw up here, whether something pre-populates or not, you're still going to have different choices of choosing different diagnoses at different stages of the game. But the choices here would be to automatically put all assessment ICDs to all tests, or automatically put only non-assessment ICDs to all tests, or only the primary assessment ICD, or both, or none. That B is what you're seeing right here, where you're automatically getting both assessment level and non-assessment level ICDs by default are auto-assigning to every test. That would be your default behavior, but you can modify it again based on how you set these properties. Now, at the tabular level, within this multi-tabular hierarchy I mentioned earlier, you have 2 choices here as well. So in my screen example here, I've expanded my radiology category. You'll notice the number 1, there's a button that says Assign ICD. Now that's at the tabular level. That's inside the shaded tab where my order type is specified, radiology order. So this Assign ICD is at the categorical level. So if you notice underneath, you have a choice of each test and each diagnosis for each test. So in this example, I have 3 radiological tests in my radiology order tab. I have a bone density, a left elbow, and a pelvis. So I can choose each one, and then whichever one I've chosen in that radio button selection and height the dark medium purple color, on the right-hand side, I simply select the diagnoses I want. Then I could go over to my little table, choose the left elbow, choose those diagnoses, choose the pelvis, choose those diagnoses. So that's another option you have. Now on the left-hand side of my slide, number 2, there's an ICD hyperlink. Now this is at the test level. This is not up at the categorical level. So it's the same diagnoses, but I don't have to choose the test because it's specific to the test I'm on. So that's the diagnosis assignment. Now we're going to look at the overview, and I mentioned, or the workflow overview. I mentioned that this may be a 2-person or a 1-person workflow. And that again is just being used for discussion's sake. But to compare the options, I kind of alluded to it earlier when going over the action buttons. If you're going to use the create order button, this is when typically the user, usually the provider or maybe the nurse or the MA, does it all in one step. They decide this is the test I want. I know what vendor they need to go to, so I'm just going to go ahead and generate the order. So it's very simple. The save button, however, is when, and maybe in a busy practice or where you have multiple doctors, multiple nurses, multiple MAs, you have patients that have all these different insurances with different rules, and maybe they can only go to LabCorp for certain tests, but they have to go to Quest for others, and maybe the doctor just doesn't have time to worry about that administrative type details. He's got too many patients to see. So he goes to the order sheet and says, I want this test, this consult, goes to the next room. Now the second person comes in behind and processes them, because now that MA or nurse, or maybe during checkout, the front office person can determine what vendor to go to, whether the insurance is going to pay it or not, do you need pre-certification, and so on. And in conjunction with that, I mentioned we have this property that can update the status on your home page to process C for consult, L for lab, P for procedure, R for radiology. And of course, that home page updates automatically every 60 seconds. So in those busy practices where you choose this method, the doctor just goes in there and does what he needs, goes to the next patient. You look at the home page and see that that's the next room you need to go into because there's something to be processed. So that's kind of the different options that you can decide how you want to use based on your local workflow. So now we're going to look at ordering each order type. Lab and radiology we take together because they are identical. My screen examples in the PowerPoint are showing lab. They do apply 100% to radiology. So your screen will preload to your preferred tests if you've defined them. If you've not defined preferred, it will default to all. So this saves you that step that you currently have when you go to order a lab or radiology today. You have to click the little plus sign icon that opens a pop-up window that then gives you your preferred, or you can go to the little purple book and search for all. This is saving you that extra pop-up because it's pre-populating. And you can go ahead and filter here to your vendor. Number 4 is if this patient has lab tests and health maintenance that you're routinely monitoring, and you just want to look at those to see if they're due again, or maybe you want to see the result. You know, family practice or rheumatology or endocrinologist, whatever. Maybe you just want to see how their glucose has been over the last 3 months. So you click health maintenance here. It brings up only the tests that you're monitoring. So it saves you a lot of time searching for things because you're going to pre-populate here based on the filters you choose. So once you've chosen the test then, based on all those filters and whatnot, then you're going to just click the little greater than arrow there on the left-hand margin. You see here next to my number 2. That highlights it in that citrusy color and displays it over on the right. So now is where we're going to start to see this multi-tabular hierarchy take effect. We've chosen our test under the lab order type. Now we're building our order. So it's going to get added over here to the right under my lab order category so that I can then schedule it, enter comments, assign different diagnoses. Now you'll notice that big blue bubble next to or underneath the number 4. If you want to schedule a test for the future, that pick list of choices is user defined, and it's reading the same group type that you defined for doctor requested follow-up. So you can put days, weeks, months, whatever in there. And then at the bottom, of course, you choose whichever order action button you want. At this point, again, if you notice next to the number 3, this is where you could realize, oh, I didn't want a CBC. I wanted a basic metabolic panel, or I wanted a whole blood count. So you could click that little X and then select the right test. Generating the order then. At this point, it's going to create a tab up on your orders ribbon. If you click the Save button, it creates a lavender or light purple tab. If you click Create Order, it creates a dark purple button. Either way, though, the order option is now going to be available. And if you notice here, the primary focus of my screen, this basically looks like what you have today when you order lab and radiology. It's a little different color palette with the user interface, but it's the same layout as far as the details that are going to go on your lab order or radiology order. So now we're looking at our order tab, where earlier we weren't able to look at the order tab because it takes different flavors based on the order types. This is what it looks like for lab and radiology. And this is where you're going to complete your requisition now. So if you notice my number 5, you have the preview option, you have the print option, fax, or e-send. So however you do your lab orders, whether you're electronically sending them through a bidirectional interface, if you're printing a hard copy requisition and handing it to your patient, or if you're faxing it to the vendor direct, you can choose whichever icon is appropriate. That updates your status to ordered. So workflow-wise, this is no different than what you already do. When you're on your lab order or radiology order, and you've clicked your little plus sign and you've chosen your test, and now you're completing your requisition, you're just doing it now within the order tab of the order sheet. Now, consults and procedures are a little different. And the term consult and prognosis in your world may mean referral. So you're referring the patient to another provider of care or another surgery center or a specialist to get a second opinion, to get a consultation, or to actually do something else. You're referring them, go get a foot exam, go get a dietary consultation, whatever. So the term consult/referral is kind of interchangeable. We use the term consult here on the order sheet. So there are no vendors applicable, so that option would be grayed out. We currently do not have a preferred consultation list, so it will default to all. And then notice at the bottom, based on your consult setup, there is a master file under Configuration Workflow Consults that you build your consultations that you order. When you build those referrals or those consultations, you have the ability of assigning a specialty and or a default physician or care center where you prefer to send the patient. Now, again, that is just going to be by default. It can be changed before you complete the order. But if you notice here underneath my number 6, I've got some of my consultations predefined to a provider, whereas that one in the middle, there's a hyperlink that says assign provider. That means I have not defined a default or a preferred. So you're going to have to choose which every single time you order that consultation, you have to choose the provider you're going to refer the patient to. In the case of the ones that default, if you want to use that preferred one, you're not going to need to change it, but you have the ability to if you want. So on the right-hand side now, once we've chosen our consult, just as with lab and radiology, by clicking that little greater than arrow, it highlights in citrus, goes over to the right. So now on the right-hand side, if you notice my number 3 and my number 4. Number 3 is the consult provider. And this example of my nutritional counseling, it's already pre-populated to Christine Mia Baranski, because if you notice on the left-hand side, that is my default provider. When I built my consult order for nutritional counseling, I said Christine was my preferred. So it's pre-populated. But next to her name there is a little magnifying glass icon and a plus icon. That magnifying glass icon allows you to change the provider. So if you do not want Christine Mia Baranski, or again, maybe now the second person has come in and realizes that this person has United Healthcare managed access, cannot go to Mia Baranski since she's out of network, but instead has to go to Mercy Medical Nutritional Department. So you want to change it. So you click the magnifying glass. That opens up this pop-up called Consult Provider. This Consult Provider is actually a system-generated lookup screen If you go under Prognosis Master Files, you will not find one called Consult Provider. However, you do have Referring Doctor, you have Referring Organization. Those two master files together populate this search screen called Consult Provider. So you can choose whether, as you see in this example, doctor names or associations, Dietitians R Us. So you can choose whoever you want to refer the patient to. The second icon there, the plus sign, allows you to create a new one. Maybe you're a new customer and you have not got any of these referring doctors predefined yet in your master file. Well, you can add them as you go, as you create an order. Now, once you generate the order then, again, whether you choose the Save button and then a second person comes in behind, or if you click the Generate Order button in one step, this is what the Order tab of a consult looks like. And as I mentioned earlier on that tabular hierarchy discussion, our consult order now has two more tabs down below. When we created our lab and our radiology, the order was just one window, the order itself, which produced the requisition. Well, with consults, we have two tabs. We have a consult tab, letter A, and we have a response tab, letter B. Letter A, the consult tab, this is a requisition or a letter that you're going to actually generate and either physically hand to your patient if you're printing a hard copy, or you're going to email it, or you're going to fax it to that recipient, to Christine Mia Baranski, to Diagnostics R Us, or whatever the scenario is. So this is now the equivalent in your existing version of your letters out screen. We've embedded that letters out correspondence screen into the order sheet here. The lower portion of your order can be customized. So it is a requisition by default, sort of like a laboratory requisition, where it's going to have all the order level details, but it could also be a letter. Maybe you want to just consult it, dear Dr. So-and-so, I'm referring this patient to you for a second opinion. Please notice my observations and findings, yada, yada, yada. So the template here that is displayed will be, by default, the one you predefine in your consult master, but you can change it now if you want by choosing a different one before you generate the order. And that, again, can be either an order or a letter, your preference. Now, if you notice the 5B on my slide right there in the middle, when you have chosen who you're sending this patient to, there's little icons that will show up next to their name to indicate how you can deliver this requisition. So for instance here with Christine Mia Baranski, if you notice next to my 5B, there's a printer, a fax, and a little push pin. Basically, those are internet icons to indicate that within Christine Mia Baranski's file, we have a physical mailing address, we have an email address, and we have a fax number present. Now, if you notice next to 5B, my other providers that I've added to my CC list, John Lee has only a fax and a physical address. He doesn't have an email. Harry Berger only has a physical address. He doesn't have fax nor email. So that helps you visually determine how you're going to produce this requisition. Now that response tab is for when you start getting results. In your current version, there's no means of tracking a consultation or a referral that whether that patient has had anything done yet. Maybe the patient was here last month. You said, I need you to go get a dietary consult so that I can determine your course of care. And you don't know if they ever did. And now they're coming back in for a follow-up visit. Well, if those, just as with lab and radiology, where those results come into you from the vendor, if you're getting results in from that person, you sent them to Christine Mia Baranski for a dietary consult. Now, if Christine is sending you her results, you can attach it to this order. And that's what the response tab is. And that, as you see here with my number 3, will update your status to results received. So this now means consults can be tracked just as you can track lab and radiology up until the point of getting a result. And then that brings us to procedures. Now, procedures on the order sheet is optional. So, and again, this is not a hard, fast rule. You can do it once in a while. You can do it all the time. You don't have to do it at all. Totally up to your local workflow. But just to kind of help you troubleshoot or brainstorm, should you or should you not use the order sheet for procedures? It depends on, is this an in-house or an external procedure? Are you performing it locally, or are you referring the patient out somewhere else? Is it going to be done today during today's visit, or is it going to be done in the future? Do you want to have this procedure next week or next month? And then is it single person or dual person workflow as far as completing that process? Now, the benefits or pros and cons here, or the whole reason we're having this slide for discussion. In your existing prognosis prior to Denali, you have an option on your encounter menu called specialty, or you may have renamed it based on your taxonomy. It might say procedures, it might say pain management or family practice or whatever your specialty is. But you have that menu option after a review of systems and physical where you can order procedures. That remains completely intact, unchanged. So if you like that workflow, you're used to it, you can continue to do it exactly the same, and you don't need to worry about doing procedures on your order sheet at all. The difference, or the benefit, however you want to look at it, if you choose to order procedures through the order sheet now, one is going to give you an order number. Two, you can associate checklists now, pre-procedure checklists, whether it's pre-certification, verification of benefits, pre-op screening, testing, whatever. You can track it to make sure it gets resulted. If you ordered your patient to get an MRI, or you sent them out to get a sleep study, you can track it to make sure they did it before you see them again in your own office. So it gives you trackability, it gives you accountability. So there's a lot of benefit to using the order sheet for your procedures. Also, you can schedule it for future, and then again, know if the future date comes and goes and that wasn't resulted. It can be saved to the document list as a procedure order, and then it'll turn into a procedure result once the result has come in. So just as with lab and radiology again, even on the document list, you'll be able to go look and see the status because it will have an order number. That's the primary significance, because as you notice my bottom bullet point here, if you continue to do business as usual under your table of contents specialty, it does not generate an order number, you cannot track it, there's nothing to attach results to. So it only shows up on your document list as an operative note. You won't know if it's ever been resulted or not. So again, there's no change in that behavior. That will continue to flow as always, and it works very well for people when you're doing a procedure in-house on today's visit especially. The significance here of procedures on the order sheet, however, seems to be most widely available when you're ordering a procedure out of your practice, where you're sending your patient somewhere else to get something done. That's where it's beneficial. Selecting the procedure is no different than we already saw. When you're on your procedure tab, just as with consults, there is no vendor, there is no preferred list, but it will pre-populate procedures that you've defined in your new procedure master. At the bottom of the slide here, you notice a path in blue. Under configuration, with Denali, you will have a new master file called procedure, wherein you can define external procedures, in-house procedures. Is there a checklist or not, and so on. So this screen will pre-populate with all of those procedures. Choose the one you want. It shows in citrus, moves over to the right-hand side. You can define the performing provider now. To whom do you want to refer this patient? Again, this is going to be based on workflow, whether you're going to do it in conjunction with the Save button or the Create Order button, because the doctor that performs the sleep study may or may not be in network for the patient. So all of that is still applicable here, just as it is at all the other order type levels. But just as we saw on consult, you have the magnifying glass here for the performing provider, if you notice underneath my number 2. That opens up that consult provider screen where you can choose a provider or an organization to whom you want to refer the patient. You've got the schedule drop-down, where you can choose to perform it now in today's visit or choose a future time frame. Now this is where it gets a little complicated with regards to my static PowerPoint and the discussion of the screen captures versus when you're actually doing it in an animated workflow. Because depending upon whether or not it is an in-house procedure or an external procedure, the screen is going to be different down below. It's the same 3 tabs, so we've got that next layer in the tabular hierarchy that we've alluded to several times earlier. On our order tab now, notice behind my number 3, we have 3 more tabs. We have a procedure tab, a checklist tab, and an attachments tab. Now if you notice what I've written in green, when it is an external procedure, you have a letters out interface. If you notice underneath that number 3 in the middle, you kind of have your word processing bar where you can cut and paste or change your font to bold and italics and paragraph alignment and so on. That's sort of because like on your letters out screen when you're creating a template, you have that functionality here. However, on the lower screenshot, it is a specialty template user interface. So you have all those icons of assigning a CPT code, copying out of history, and all these other functionalities that are available to you at the specialty level. So even though you have the same 3 tabs, procedure, checklist, attachments, the detail underneath, which we're going to see here in the next few slides, is going to be different based on, are you doing the procedure internally or are you referring the patient out to have it done externally? So now we're going to look at that. We're going to dissect the procedure order by procedure type. In the case of an external procedure, you're not doing it in-house, you're referring the patient to another provider. It's the same as we saw with your consults. It defaults to an order requisition that you can customize to be a letter or a requisition, whichever you prefer. If you notice number 3B, it gives you the icons of printing, faxing, emailing. And if you notice 2B, where you got your patient's name, Stephen, I see you better, you've got the different little icons to indicate whether or not he has an email, a fax number, or a physical address. So just as with consults, your external procedures are generated through a consultation letter / order requisition based on how you prefer to format it. And you can either print it physically, hand it to your patient, fax it, or email it. So that is what will default in the case of an external procedure. On the order tab, on the procedure tab. Now, the in-house procedure, notice this looks totally different at the bottom. It looks like a template because in-house procedures are something you're actually documenting. So you don't need a letter or a requisition telling you what you're ordering because you're doing it. So you have the procedure to actually do it. This also flows automatically under your table of contents specialty. So you're going to have it in 2 places now. You'll have it on the order sheet if you're ordering it through the order sheet for the sake of that added benefit of an order number and tracking for result and having a checklist. But as I mentioned earlier, you still have the specialty option, which behaves exactly as it always has. So if you are ordering an in-house procedure, it is also going to copy automatically under specialty TOC. And then you can decide if you're going to update it on either screen. The only difference here on your specialty TOC, if you see the number 2, you have a hyperlink to the order number, which opens the order sheet. You also cannot delete it from here. So even though I don't have it circled on my PowerPoint slide, if you notice next to the template name, aspiration of lesion, it cannot be removed because you ordered it through the order sheet. It has that order number. It is displayed here under the specialty option, display only. Now, in that same case, if you're doing the in-house procedure in the future, you're not doing it today, you want the patient to come back next week to do it, but you're doing it, so it's not a referral out. It still brings in that in-house template. You're just not going to answer the questions right now because you're only ordering it to be done in the future. So when you close this encounter today, all those questions drop off because you're not actually doing it. So it still shows up here under specialty because you ordered it. It still gives you the hyperlink to open it up on the order sheet. But since you're not actually documenting what you did today, none of the questions will be there once you close the encounter. Unlike in the case of doing it now, the questions are there because you're actually documenting it now. So when it comes to these procedure order, if it's external, your procedure order tab is a letter or a requisition that you can fax, print, or email. If it's an in-house procedure, it's going to show you the questions, and if you're doing it now, you can go ahead and complete it now. If it's for the future, the questions will display, but you're not going to answer them, and when you close the encounter, they fall off. Because then when they come back next week, you're going to actually answer the questions. Now, I mentioned there's a checklist feature now. This checklist is a clinic form that is customized by you locally, and you indicate whether or not it's a procedure checklist. And if so, it will be available to you here in the same screen. So you can do your pre-certification workup, your benefit verification, your surgery scheduling, pre-op screening, whatever it is that you do. So this is an extremely nice new feature that many clients have been waiting for. And then you have the attachments tab, just as we saw in the results. So if you did send this patient out, and now you're getting the results back from where they went, you're getting the sleep study results from the sleep lab, you're getting the MRI result or the diagnostic report or whatever, now you can attach it. And as you see there next to the number 3, it lets you know on what encounter those results are associated. So that's the workflow of the order sheet by order type. Now there was a 5th tab that I didn't really spend any time on called Quick View. On the order tab, order type tabs, we just went through Lab Radiology Consult Procedure. There's a 5th tab called Quick. At the bottom of my slide here, you see a property that you can define, user profile types, doctor, nurse, medical assistant, and so on, who would like to use the Quick tab by default instead of clicking each individual appointment order type. What the Quick tab is a singular tab that combines all of those other 4. So then you just scroll through one big window there at the bottom. Instead of on the lab, it defaults to labs only, radiology defaults to radiology only, consults only, etc. The Quick tab will give you everything. So if you notice here on my screenshot at the bottom, you go from lab directly into radiology in one big scrolling window. So for people that like that option, that just want to use their scroll bar and go up and down and choose everything, that is also available to you. And in doing that, then all of your categories over on the right-hand side will get populated at one time. Now, the only other benefit of this Quick View is an order sheet order set. Now, each order type has an order set, and an order set, in case you're not aware, is a panel, a custom grouping of tests that you want to do. And instead of ordering 5 individual tests, you order the order set. So it's one selection, but it explodes into 5 different tests, just like a panel would. Only these are locally defined, quote-unquote, panels. Well, at each individual order type, all you can do is specific to that order type. So you could create a lab order set, but you can only put lab tests in it. A radiology order set can only have radiology tests in it. Well, under the Quick View, you have an order sheet order set, which, as you see in my example, can include all order types. So let's say based on your practice, you have certain regimen, protocols. For instance, in my test example here, I called it annual diabetic review. For my annual diabetic review, whether I'm family practice or a rheumatologist, whatever, I'm going to order glucose, I'm going to order A1C, I'm going to order x-ray of the chest, I'm going to do nutritional counseling, I'm going to do an eye exam. I might also want to do a foot exam or whatever else in there. But it's a combination of procedures, consults, lab, and radiology. So that is another nice benefit of the Quick View tab, is you can have order sheet order sets. Now there's setup to all of what we've just talked about. I mentioned several times throughout that there's master files. That's what we're going to look at now. So this, of course, requires administrator permissions. So those of you in the practice who does your setup, there's all of these master files associated with everything we've just talked about. Some of these already exist. Some of these are new to Denali. The consult master. You define the consultation that you want to order, specify whether it's male, female, or both. Those are mandatory to create it. If you want to order it, you have to at least have that. Then you have the options of defining a specialty, a preferred doctor, and a letter template. And as we talked about up above in the workflow, even if you define a preferred, it can be changed at the order level. You do not have to define a deferred. So that's all based on how you want to do your setup. The letter template can be either a requisition or a letter, whichever you prefer. In the Denali upgrade, when it's applied to your clinic, it is going to be a default order template, as you see pictured here. And that's going to just loosely resemble a requisition, like your lab requisition. It won't be a letter per se, unless you customize it or choose, because you'll notice there you have a drop down. So you can choose any other template you want. Now the procedure master is very similar, but in addition to the name and the gender, you have to indicate whether it's in-house or external, because that's going to trigger those different workflows we saw up above, whether it requires an order template or letter that you're referring out, or if it's going to give you your internal procedure template that you're actually documenting. You also have the option of assigning your checklist. So the only difference here, this is in-house, where you're defining a procedural template in addition to your checklist in order. External, you do not have to define an in-house template, because if you're referring them out, you just need that letter requisition. But you can also have a checklist still. Now this procedure master is brand new to Denali. It does not exist right now in your current version. Consult master exists right now. It just has new functionality in Denali. I mentioned the order sheet, order set rather, that is also its own master file. So if you didn't want to create it as you go through the order sheet itself, you can go under configuration, order set, and create them here. There's permissions involved. Again, some of you that may already be using partially, like for lab and radiology, you may have those options at the top, but consult and procedure options are brand new to Denali. So if you're going to use this order sheet, your clinical staff, your doctors, your nurses, your MAs, whoever does checkout may need to have these user permissions given to them. Now, outside of the order sheet itself, other orders-related features. And some of these are touched on in part 1 of our webinar, which deals with all of the other upgrade features of Denali. Some of them overlap with the order sheet, so I'm including them again here. That's your CPOE tab. We have the new menu choices for consult and procedure. And these follow the same statuses that your lab radiology do. A for approved, O for ordered, R for results received. And based on the status of the entry you choose is what determines what screen opens next. So if you notice here in my bullet points, if you select an approved or an ordered, it's going to open a consult order to the consult tab so that you can see the requisition or the letter that went to that recipient. If you choose one that's a status R or C, it's going to open the response tab so you can actually review the results. So this is system level searching now. Maybe you don't know about the encounter, or the encounter's closed and you don't want to go to encounter history. You just want to know when this consult was done. Did I order this procedure? Did a result come in yet? This is when, you get a phone call. Hey, did you ever hear back from my sleep study yet? And you want to come in here and do a name search at the system level, look at that status, and then when you choose it, it's either going to open the consult order screen or the response screen. Procedures the same way. Same statuses apply. It's either going to open the procedure tab order or the procedure tab result. And that will be based upon whether or not it's internal or external. So in the case of external procedure not yet resulted, this is what it would look like. The requisition or the letter that you sent to that person ordering this procedure. If it's been results received, it's going to open the result tab. If it's an in-house procedure, it opens the template because it was a template done in-house. It wasn't a letter requisition sent out. Now there's a new menu option added to your table of content also called Procedure Order. This displays your procedure from the order sheet. Now again, this is where it can get a little confusing for folks using the order sheet with procedures, because a procedure ordered through the order sheet will now display in 3 places. You will see it under Encounter Table of Contents Specialty, Encounter Table of Content Procedure Order, this new option, as well as Order Sheet Procedure. Now there's new menu types added to the document list submenu for consult and procedure. Very similar to what we just talked about under CPOE. The same is true here on your document list. And it will either be an order or a response, depending on the status. If you use health maintenance, there's now a hyperlink in between health maintenance and the order sheet. So it's easy to see the result when relevant. So those are the features of orders management included in the Denali upgrade. Now what's coming next as far as the upgrade and your practice? When you're scheduled to be upgraded, you will get a pop-up after you log in. All users who log in 7 days in advance will start to get this pop-up telling you when you're scheduled to get the upgrade. Now, if you have any questions, you can always contact technical support. They are not part of the scheduling team, however, so they may not be able to tell you exactly when you're getting it. We are doing upgrades daily, so just watch for that pop-up to let you know when you're scheduled. Once the upgrade is completed in your practice, you're going to start to see a lot of these little yellow bubbles. These are called first-time user experience bubbles, and our training and development team is introducing these now wherever changes are to try to introduce people to changes in the system. Even outside of the context of webinars, if we do patch upgrades, you're going to see these pop-ups now letting you know that something has changed. The links are to hide or don't show again. Don't show again means you're never going to see it again for that particular hint. Hide is going to conceal it for that logged in session only. But the next time you log in and go to a different patient, you will see it again. You will have a shortcut at the top called New that stays there for 30 days that opens the detailed release notes. What I've just presented here in 50 or 60 PowerPoint slides is encompassed into a multi-100-page technical document that our technical writers release. So if you are one that likes to read the full tech notes, those are available in the system. Even after that new bubble disappears, you can go to the Life Preserver, click on Release Notes, and since this is part of EMR, they will be in the turquoise column. And then finally, please remember the Resource Center is there for your benefit. As I mentioned, I've been recording this session, so this is going to get posted there later tonight as the Denali Upgrade EMR Part 2. All of the other sessions have also been recorded and are out there under the video section, webinar videos. Under documentation, you can also access this PowerPoint if you want a version of the PowerPoint for your own. So that is the extent of today's session. Are there any questions? If so, you can click that little raise hand icon on your toolbar. Okay, I'm going to assume then that all is well. I want to thank you for your attendance today. There is a brief survey you'll be getting here at the end of the session. Feel free to send us your feedback if you are comfortable doing so.